No, please don't me! No! No, please don't.
I don't even know how many times I shot her. Once I started, I just couldn't stop. Those were not the words of a witness, not the account of a neighbor who had just heard gunshots. Those were the words of Marcus Duriel Lofton, the man sitting in an interrogation room just hours after his wife was found dead. That woman was Alicia Danielle Lofton, 38 years old, a mother of 3. And on the morning of August 17, 2023, Alicia was still alive. She had a new day ahead of her. Children who were continuing to grow up. A life that, by all appearances, she was trying to reclaim for herself. But just a few hours later, everything was over. What makes this story so haunting is not simply that Alicia was shot multiple times. It is that, before it happened, she appeared to understand that she was in a dangerous relationship. She had called the police before. Marcus had been arrested. A no-contact order had been issued. And just one day before she was killed, Alicia had begun taking steps to end her marriage. She had tried to leave. But Marcus came back, and that is what leaves this case with one painful question. What does a person have to do to truly escape someone they no longer want to live with? Because on that morning, Alicia was not simply facing an argument. According to the events that later emerged in the case, she ran. She locked the door. She tried to find a way out, but Marcus did not stop. And when it was over, Alicia had been shot 15 times. When police arrived, all that remained was a blood-soaked crime scene, spent shell casings, and a life that had been cut short forever. But the real story does not begin with gunfire. It began long before that, with a marriage. With warning signs that perhaps no one initially believed would lead to an ending like this, and with decisions that may have seemed small at the time, but ultimately led to a morning that could never be taken back. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. If you enjoy in-depth true crime stories that closely follow the timeline of a case and search for what truly happened behind a tragedy, please subscribe to support us. Your support gives us the motivation to continue bringing you higher quality stories in future videos. And before we turn back the clock to find out who Alicia was, who Marcus was, and what really happened during those 6 fateful months of marriage, I want to ask you a question. In a relationship where violence has already appeared, what do you think is more important? A. Leave as soon as possible once you recognize the warning signs. B. Seek support and create a safety plan before leaving. Comment A or B and share your thoughts below. Now, let's go back to the days before the gunshots rang out. Before the interrogation room, before Alicia Danielle Lofton became a name in a homicide case. Because before she was murdered, Alicia was a human being with an entire life still ahead of her. Alicia Danielle Lofton should not be remembered only for the way her life ended. Because before her name appeared in investigative files, before crime scene photographs were collected, and before her family had to enter a courtroom to hear what happened on August 17, 2023, Alicia was a woman with an entire life of her own. A life filled with plans, responsibilities, people she loved, and a future that, at the time, she still had every reason to believe she had plenty of time to live. Alicia Danielle Lofton was 38 years old and the mother of 3 children. But simply describing her as a mother of 3 is not enough to capture the role she played in their lives. Because for a mother, presence is not defined only by family photographs or holidays. Sometimes, it exists in the smallest things, things people barely notice. The person who calls to ask whether her child made it home safely. The one who remembers an important exam. The one who knows which child is hurting, even when that child insists they are fine. The one who is present in the most ordinary moments of life, so consistently that the people who love her may begin to believe that presence will always be there. But then, there are days when a loss occurs, and suddenly, everything that once seemed ordinary becomes something that can never be brought back. That is what happened to Alicia's family. Before becoming the victim in a homicide case, Alicia had spent years building a life of her own. According to information about her life referenced in the case, Alicia worked in the healthcare field for many years, including more than a decade with Spectrum Health. 10 years. That is not a short period of time. 10 years means countless mornings waking up and going to work, countless ordinary days, with no way of knowing that those ordinary days would one day become the very things people would treasure most. A job is not simply a source of income. For many people, it is also part of how they build their identity. It is where they meet colleagues, where they learn responsibility, where they spend thousands of hours of their lives. Alicia had also pursued cosmetology, showing that she did not tie her life to a single path. She had different directions, choices, and hopes for her future. When we look at Alicia's life before the tragedy, it is important to understand that she was not a character who entered this story only at the moment she became a victim. She had a life before that, years in which this case did not exist. Days when the name Marcus Lofton was not connected to her life in the way the world would later come to know. She had a family, a career. People who knew her not through a homicide headline, but through conversations, workdays, and memories that had nothing to do with courtrooms or police investigations. And perhaps that is one of the easiest things to forget when telling a story about a crime. A criminal case often begins with a moment, a date, a call to emergency services, a crime scene, a body, a suspect. But the victim's life does not begin there. Alicia had lived for 38 years before becoming a name mentioned in the criminal case against Marcus Duriel Lofton. And during those 38 years, she had become a mother, a daughter, a colleague, a family member, a person with her own place in the lives of those around her. Death can end a life in only a matter of minutes, but it cannot erase everything that existed before. For Alicia's 3 children in particular, this loss was not simply an event that happened on one day in 2023. It is something that continues, because when a mother is gone, she does not simply disappear from the present. Her absence also appears in the future. It appears during important moments when she should have been there. A graduation, a first job, a failure that leaves someone needing a person to call, a great joy that they want to share, a moment when, almost instinctively, someone thinks, "I need to tell Mom." And then, there is no one on the other end of the line. That is the kind of loss that does not end when the funeral is over. It continues to change shape over time. The first days may bring shock. The months that follow may bring grief, and years later, the loss can return in moments without warning. A song, a familiar scent, an old photograph, a holiday, or simply a moment when someone suddenly realizes that they have reached another important milestone in life without the person who should have been there, and that is something the numbers in a criminal sentence can never fully describe. The law can measure time in years. 2 years, 25 years, 50 years. But a family's loss does not operate that way. There is no specific day when Alicia's family will wake up and realize they are somehow done grieving. There is no sentence, no matter how severe, that can return Alicia to the place she once held within her family. Justice can hold someone accountable, but justice cannot reverse time. It cannot restore the conversations that will never happen. It cannot bring a mother back into the home where her children once knew they could find her. And that is why, before we go deeper into Marcus, into the marriage, the warning signs, and ultimately the mourning that led to the homicide, we need to pause and see Alicia as a human being. Not simply as the victim, not simply as the woman who was murdered, not simply as a name appearing in an indictment, but as Alicia Danielle Lofton, a woman who lived a life of her own. A mother of 3 children, a person who spent years working and building her own path, someone with a family and relationships whose absence left behind spaces that can never truly be filled. And perhaps that is what makes the story even more heartbreaking when we look at what happened afterward. Because at that point in her life, Alicia was not someone without a future. She was still in the middle of her life. 38 years old, an age when so much could still lie ahead. Her children were continuing to grow up. Life was still moving forward. Work, family, plans, changes. Like so many people, Alicia could not have known that one day her life would be divided into 2 parts. The life before she met Marcus Duriel Lofton, and the life after that relationship began. That is what makes looking back at cases like this so complicated. Once we know how the story ends, it becomes easy to look back and believe that every warning sign was obvious. But for Alicia, at that moment, the future had not happened yet. She did not know that her name would one day become connected to a murder case. She did not know that the people she loved would one day sit inside a courtroom and listen to the details of her final hours. She did not know that her 3 children would have to continue their lives without their mother. And that is perhaps the greatest tragedy of all. A person is still living in their present, still making choices, still trying to move forward, without knowing that something ahead is waiting that could change everything. However, to understand how Alicia's life reached that point, we cannot begin only on the day of the homicide. We have to go back. Back to the time when Alicia entered a new relationship. Back to the man who would later become her husband. A man named Marcus Duriel Lofton, 42 years old, known to some by the nickname Bub. And before Marcus's name appeared in criminal charges connected to Alicia's death, he also had a past of his own, an image of his own, and a history that, when placed alongside everything that happened later, began to reveal a far more complicated picture. But just like Alicia, Marcus should not be understood through a single moment alone. To understand the full story, we need to go back to the life of this man before he became a defendant. Because before the gunshots, before the interrogation room, before the trial, and before Alicia Danielle Lofton became the victim of a case that would forever take a loved one away from her family, Marcus Duriel Lofton entered her life in a very different role. He was the man Alicia chose to trust. Marcus Duriel Lofton, 42, was also known by the nickname Bub. Before his name appeared in the records of a murder case, Marcus had already created an image of his own in the eyes of those who followed him on social media. It was a world of cars, music, fashion, and posts that reflected his personal style. Based on what he chose to share publicly, Marcus appeared to be a man who cared deeply about how he was perceived. But there can be a vast distance between the image a person creates for the public and the full story of who they really are. Social media allows us to see what someone chooses to be seen. A photograph can capture a single moment. A video can create an impression. A post can lead others to believe they understand the life of the person on the other side of the screen. But sometimes, what is not posted is the most important part of the story. When looking into Marcus's past, a more complicated picture begins to emerge. According to information referenced in the case, Marcus had previously faced legal issues involving firearms and drugs. These incidents were not simply minor details from his past. They became particularly significant when viewed alongside what happened later. Marcus was legally prohibited from possessing a firearm, and yet, a gun would later become central to the case that took Alicia's life. That tragic irony meant that Marcus's past was no longer merely background information. It became part of the legal context surrounding the case. However, it is important to be clear about one thing. A criminal history is not a prophecy. A person who has made mistakes or committed crimes in the past is not automatically destined to commit another crime in the future. In a true crime story, what matters most must always be the specific actions that actually occurred. Not what we think someone seemed like, not assumptions created after a tragedy has already happened, but what can be established through records, evidence, and the sequence of events that led to the tragedy. And it is at this point that Marcus's story becomes particularly significant, because before becoming the man accused, and later convicted, in connection with the death of Alicia Danielle Lofton, he was once the man Alicia chose to marry. That is what makes this story more complicated than simply looking at it from the ending. After a crime takes place, people often look back and ask, why did she marry him? Why didn't anyone see it coming? Were all the warning signs there from the beginning? But life does not unfold like a movie where the audience already knows the ending. Alicia did not enter this marriage knowing what would happen 6 months later. She could not see the morning when she would one day have to run from the man who had once been her husband. And no one could have known with certainty, at the moment they got married, that this story would eventually be presented before a jury and end with a prison sentence spanning decades. That is why we need to be careful when looking back at Marcus. There is another important aspect to the way his public image appeared, the difference between the outside world and what may have been happening in private. While social media could show cars, lifestyle, and carefully selected moments, personal relationships can contain tensions that outsiders never see. And in the case of Marcus and Alicia, the story began to change just a few months after their marriage. This is the point where we should not rush to turn Marcus into a one-dimensional character. A strong true crime narrative does not need excessive judgment or exaggerated language to make an audience feel fear or outrage. Sometimes, the events themselves carry enough weight. A man with a legal history involving firearms. A man legally prohibited from possessing a gun. A marriage that lasted only a short time. Then the police began to enter the story. A violent incident occurred. A no-contact order was issued. And later, as the wife began trying to end the marriage, the relationship moved closer and closer toward a point of no return. Perhaps the most frightening part is not that everything happened in a single day. Quite the opposite. When looking back at the entire timeline, the tragedy appears to have been shaped through several different stages. First, there was a meeting. Then came the marriage. Cracks began to appear. Police intervention followed. Legal problems emerged. Distance grew between them. And finally came Alicia's decision to leave. At this point in the story, Marcus still had no way of knowing that his life was about to change completely. But what happened in the months that followed would ensure that his name would no longer be remembered because of social media posts, his lifestyle, or the nickname, Bub. The name Marcus Daryl Lofton would become connected to a house in Grand Rapids, an August morning, a gun, and the death of the woman he had once called his wife. But before all of that happened, there was still one important chapter that needed to be examined. A marriage that began in Las Vegas. A marriage without many family members standing nearby to witness it. A marriage in which, within only a few short months, an outwardly ordinary appearance would gradually be replaced by signs of something deeply wrong. And it was there that the story of Alicia and Marcus began moving down a path from which neither of them would ever be able to turn back. The marriage between Alicia Danielle Lofton and Marcus Daryl Lofton began in Las Vegas. It was not marked by a large wedding surrounded by family, friends, and loved ones. Instead, it was a decision made privately between the two of them. According to details mentioned in the case, Alicia's family did not fully support the marriage, but in the end, Alicia chose to follow her own decision. And in those early days, there was nothing obvious enough to predict the tragic ending that lay ahead. On social media, they appeared to be an ordinary couple. There were photos together, shared moments, and a marriage that seemed to have only just begun. But sometimes, what people see is only the surface of a story, while what is happening behind closed doors has yet to be revealed. Just a few months after the wedding, May 17, 2023, became a significant turning point. According to the course of the case, police were called following a violent incident involving Marcus and Alicia. Marcus was arrested, and a no-contact order was later issued. That was the moment when everything began to change. From that point forward, their marriage was no longer simply a relationship experiencing conflict. What had happened had moved beyond the boundaries of private arguments. The police had intervened. The law had drawn a line, but that line alone could not end every danger. A no-contact order can make it very clear that one person is not allowed to approach another. But ultimately, it still depends on whether the person subject to that order chooses to obey it. And in the months that followed, Alicia found herself facing an increasingly clear decision. She could not continue living in a marriage like this. But before Alicia could truly walk away from Marcus and leave his life behind, something else happened. A secret began to come to light. Trust continued to fall apart, and a marriage that had lasted only a few months began moving toward a point of no return. Trust in a marriage rarely disappears in a single moment. Sometimes, it begins with a suspicion, a detail that cannot be explained, an answer that is no longer convincing. And then, little by little, the pieces begin to come together, leading someone to realize that the life they believed in may not be exactly what they once thought it was. For Alicia Danielle Lofton, the months following her turbulent marriage brought further discoveries that placed even greater strain on her relationship with Marcus. According to information mentioned in the case, Alicia discovered things related to Marcus's private life that she could not ignore. Some of this information was reportedly shared on social media, leading to reactions and confrontations between the two. However, one point needs to be made clear. Not every detail surrounding private arguments was fully confirmed in the legal record. For that reason, what matters most is not speculation or rumor, but what Alicia chose to do next. She decided to end the marriage. On August 16, 2023, just one day before she was killed, Alicia began taking legal steps related to divorce. She was also facing changes involving the home and the life that lay ahead. This was no longer a threat made in the heat of an argument. It was no longer just another fight that would eventually pass. It was a decision. Alicia was trying to move into a new chapter of her life. Perhaps, to her, that day represented the beginning of a process of freedom, a chance to leave behind months of tension and rebuild a peaceful life for herself and her children. But sometimes, the moment a person decides to leave is precisely when a conflict enters its most dangerous stage. The following morning, August 17, 2023, Marcus Lofton arrived at the house. According to his later statement, he said he had gone there to collect his belongings. But that encounter would not end with Marcus simply gathering his things and leaving. It would begin with an argument, and it would end with gunfire. Gunfire that would forever cut short the future Alicia had been trying to reclaim for herself. The morning of August 17, 2023, began like any other day. But for Alicia Danielle Lofton, it would become the last morning of her life. Alicia's children were not at the house at the time. There was only Alicia, and then Marcus Lofton arrived. Later, Marcus said that he had gone there to collect his belongings, but whatever his original purpose may have been, the encounter quickly turned into an argument. The tensions that had been building for months appeared to erupt all at once inside that house. According to the testimony and the sequence of events presented in the case, Marcus did not leave when the argument began to escalate. Instead, he went to where a gun was being kept. He opened a drawer, and he took Alicia's Glock. That was the moment everything changed. Alicia saw the gun. She ran. In those moments, Alicia did not move toward Marcus. She did not continue the confrontation. According to what was presented in court, she ran into the bedroom and locked the door behind her. But the locked door did not stop the pursuit. Marcus continued toward her. According to the case records, the bedroom door was forced open. Alicia then tried to escape through a window, a final attempt to put distance between herself and the man holding the gun. But she could not get away. Gunshots rang out. Alicia was shot a total of 15 times. Just hours earlier, she had still been inside the very home where she lived. Only one day before, she had begun taking steps to end her marriage. But now, that home had become the scene of a homicide. What makes this sequence of events especially haunting is that it did not happen in a single instant. There was an argument. There was time to leave. There was a moment before the gun was taken. There was the moment Alicia ran. There was a locked door. And finally, there was a desperate attempt to escape through a window. But according to the events of the case, Marcus did not stop. After Alicia collapsed, he left the scene. He did not stay with her. Marcus was not the one who called for help. The gun was later discarded. And while Alicia was left behind, the sound of gunfire alerted people nearby that something terrible had just happened. By the time police arrived, they could not turn back time. They could not take Alicia back to the moments before the argument. They could not take her back to the moment she ran into the bedroom and locked the door. They could not take her back to the moments before the gunshots rang out. But from what remained at the scene, an investigation began, and the man investigators needed to find was not a stranger. It was the man Alicia had once called her husband. The morning of August 17, 2023, began like any other day, but for Alicia Danielle Lofton, it would become the last morning of her life. Alicia's children were not at the house at the time. There was only Alicia, and then Marcus Lofton arrived. Later, Marcus said that he had gone there to collect his belongings, but whatever his original purpose may have been, the encounter quickly turned into an argument. The tensions that had been building for months appeared to erupt all at once inside that house. According to the testimony and the sequence of events presented in the case, Marcus did not leave when the argument began to escalate. Instead, he went to where a gun was being kept. He opened a drawer, and he took Alicia's Glock. That was the moment everything changed. Alicia saw the gun. She ran. In those moments, Alicia did not move toward Marcus. She did not continue the confrontation. According to what was presented in court, she ran into the bedroom and locked the door behind her. But the locked door did not stop the pursuit. Marcus continued toward her. According to the case records, the bedroom door was forced open. Alicia then tried to escape through a window, a final attempt to put distance between herself and the man holding the gun. But she could not get away. Gunshots rang out. Alicia was shot a total of 15 times. Just hours earlier, she had still been inside the very home where she lived. Only one day before, she had begun taking steps to end her marriage. But now, that home had become the scene of a homicide. What makes this sequence of events especially haunting is that it did not happen in a single instant. There was an argument. There was time to leave. There was a moment before the gun was taken. There was the moment Alicia ran. There was a locked door. And finally, there was a desperate attempt to escape through a window. But according to the events of the case, Marcus did not stop. After Alicia collapsed, he left the scene. He did not stay with her. Marcus was not the one who called for help. The gun was later discarded. And while Alicia was left behind, the sound of gunfire alerted people nearby that something terrible had just happened. By the time police arrived, they could not turn back time. They could not take Alicia back to the moments before the argument. They could not take her back to the moment she ran into the bedroom and locked the door. They could not take her back to the moments before the gunshots rang out. But from what remained at the scene, an investigation began. And the man investigators needed to find was not a stranger. It was the man Alicia had once called her husband. Nearly 2 years after the death of Alicia Danielle Lofton, the case finally went to trial. But when the trial began, the most important question was no longer simply who had pulled the trigger. Marcus had admitted that he was the one who fired the gun. The question the jury now had to confront was what had been going through his mind during those final moments. Marcus said that everything had happened too quickly, that he had not gone to the house with a plan to kill Alicia, that the argument had pushed everything beyond his control. That was how Marcus looked back on the morning that changed the lives of everyone involved. But prosecutors viewed that same morning in a completely different way. They did not focus only on the moment the gun was fired. They looked at everything that happened before it. An argument, a gun being taken, Alicia running away, a locked door, Marcus continuing forward, Alicia trying to escape through a window, and then the gunshots. Inside the courtroom, each of those details became part of a larger question. Was this truly nothing more than an uncontrollable outburst? Or was it a sequence of actions in which, at every stage, Marcus still had the ability to choose to stop? Marcus also took the stand in his own defense. He tried to explain his emotions, his anger, and his state of mind at the time. But once an explanation is placed before a court, it is no longer judged solely by what a person says. It is measured against what that person actually did. And this was where Marcus's account had to confront a sequence of events that could not be changed. He did not leave. He took the gun. He continued after Alicia ran. And when everything was over, he left the scene without calling for help. The trial, therefore, was not simply a debate about a single gunshot or one moment of lost control. It became a confrontation between two different versions of the same event. One side said, everything happened too quickly. The other asked, if that were true, why were there so many separate steps, one after another? After several days of testimony and the presentation of evidence, the jury was given the task of reaching a decision. But in the end, they could not reach a unanimous verdict. On May 23, 2025, the trial ended without a final judgment. A mistrial was declared. And for Alicia's family, that meant leaving the courtroom without a final legal answer to her death. But the story was not over. Marcus remained in custody. And just a few weeks later, he would make a decision that would completely change the direction of the case. A trial ending without a verdict does not mean the case is over. For the family of Alicia Danielle Lofton, May 23, 2025, was likely a day they would never forget, in a particularly painful way. They had waited nearly 2 years to enter the courtroom, to hear again what had happened to Alicia, and to hope that, at last, a legal answer would be given. But the jury could not reach a unanimous decision. A mistrial was declared. There was no final verdict. No moment of closure that Alicia's family could carry with them as they left the courthouse. However, Marcus Lofton was not released. The case continued, and he still faced serious charges. The only thing that had changed was the path toward a final conviction. Then came July 2025, when Marcus made a decision that Alicia herself would never have the chance to witness. He pleaded guilty. Marcus Lofton agreed to plead guilty to second-degree murder, along with the charge of felony firearm. It was a significant turning point. After months of preparation and a trial that had failed to reach a conclusion, Marcus's criminal responsibility for Alicia's death no longer had to be argued before another jury. But a guilty plea could not make what happened any simpler. A guilty plea can bring one part of a legal battle to an end. It can spare a victim's family from having to endure another trial, but it cannot give back what they have lost. Alicia was still gone. Her 3 children still had to continue growing up without their mother, and her family still had to live with an absence that no legal proceeding could ever fill. After Marcus entered his guilty plea, the case moved into its final stage. Sentencing was approaching, and this time, the focus of the courtroom would no longer be solely on what Marcus had said to explain his actions. The people who loved Alicia would have the opportunity to stand up, to look directly at the man who had killed her, and to speak about something that case files, evidence, and no sentence, no matter how severe, could ever fully describe. The price a family pays when someone they love never comes home again. On August 7, 2025, Marcus Duriel Lofton once again sat inside a courtroom. But this time, there were no longer lengthy arguments about what had happened on the morning Alicia died. Marcus had already pleaded guilty. All that remained was for the court to decide how he would pay for what he had done. But before the sentence was handed down, Alicia's family was given the opportunity to speak. But before fourth-quarter intensity, to speak. It was perhaps one of the most painful moments of the entire case, because inside that courtroom, Alicia could no longer tell her own story. But the people who loved her could. They did not speak about the evidence. They did not analyze shell casings. They did not debate legal terminology. They spoke about a human being who had been taken from their lives. Alicia's father, Arthur Joseph, along with other family members, had to face the man who had killed her. It was a confrontation no family should ever have to endure. But perhaps the most emotional moment came when Brooklyn, Alicia's daughter, stood to speak. Behind her, there was no longer a mother who could walk into the courtroom and stand beside her daughter. Alicia was gone, and Brooklyn had to speak for herself about what that loss had left behind. She spoke about the milestones in life her mother would never get to witness. About the days when Alicia should have been there. About the emptiness her mother's death had left within their family. Those words reminded everyone in the courtroom that a murder does not end when the person responsible is placed in handcuffs. It continues to exist in the lives of those left behind. After listening to the statements, Judge Scott Noto sentenced Marcus to 2 years in prison for the felony firearm conviction, followed by 25 to 50 years for second-degree murder, with the sentences to be served consecutively. Legally, that was Marcus's sentence. But for Alicia's family, no sentence could ever truly be called compensation, because they had not come to court to get back the years that had been taken from them. They came to speak one simple truth. Marcus may spend most of the rest of his life in prison. But Alicia will never have the chance to live the full life she should have been allowed to live. After the trial came to an end, the numbers in the sentence gradually became part of the official record. 2 years, 25 to 50 years. Periods of time that defined the price Marcus Lofton would have to pay for his actions. But for Alicia Danielle Lofton's family, time is not measured by the number of years he will spend in prison. It is measured by the days Alicia is no longer there. Birthdays, family dinners, phone calls that no one will ever answer again. The important milestones her 3 children will have to face without their mother by their side. That is perhaps the most painful thing a case like this leaves behind. It is not only the moment when a life is taken. It is also everything that could have happened afterward, all the moments that disappear along with that person. Alicia will no longer watch her children grow up the way she once hoped to. There will be no more days when she stands behind them, encouraging them. No more moments of sharing joy, disappointment, or the small details of everyday life. But while a person may leave this world, the impact they leave behind does not necessarily disappear. Alicia still lives on, in the memories of those who loved her, in the 3 children she raised, in the family stories that will continue to be told. And perhaps that is also why we need to remember cases like this in the right way. Marcus Lofton was the person responsible for the actions that took Alicia's life. But this story should not revolve solely around the name of the man who pulled the trigger, because if we remember only the perpetrator, we risk allowing the person whose life was taken to become a secondary detail in their own tragedy. Alicia Danielle Lofton was not simply the woman who was shot 15 times. She was a mother, a daughter, a woman who had a life before she became a victim. And she was also someone who had been trying to leave a marriage that was falling apart. Alicia's story leaves behind a question that perhaps all of us should reflect on. When someone is trying to leave a dangerous relationship, do we truly see the level of risk they may be facing? Because sometimes, what a person needs is not the question, "Why haven't you left yet?" but a hand willing to help them leave safely. And after everything that happened, Alicia Danielle Lofton deserves to be remembered not only for the way she died, but for the life she lived, for the love she had for her children, and for the space her absence will forever leave in the hearts of those who loved her.